Raiding the Tomb of Esther. Before we raid Esther's tomb, let's ask a very important question. Does Esther belong in the Bible? It's the only book in the Bible that does not mention God. It appears to conflict with history. Maybe it never happened at all. Let's take a look at the story and see if we can answer any of those objections. Esther begins with a party in which the king of Persia calls for his wife, Vashti, to join him. When she refuses, he calls on his wise men to find out what he should do. For the sake of the kingdom, he deposes the queen and issues a decree that a new queen will take her place. Virgins are gathered from throughout the land. Esther finds favor in the king's eyes and is chosen to replace Vashti as the new queen. Meanwhile, Esther's cousin, Mordecai, overhears a plot to kill the king and tells Esther. Esther tells the king, and the would-be assassins are executed. But not all is rosy. When an evil man named Haman is promoted, Mordecai refuses to bow in his presence. This infuriates the proud Haman, who hatches a plot to kill not only Haman, but all the Jews. After telling a pack of lies about the Jews to the king and promising to give the king a fortune, Haman receives the king's seal. He then orders that all the Jews be killed on a special day which is decided by lots. Stricken with grief for his people, Mordecai rips his clothes and wails in the street. Esther wants to help, but she is not allowed to talk to the king unless he summons her. Desperate, Esther approaches the king anyways. To her relief, he is happy to see her. Instead of telling him what has happened right away, she hatches a plot of her own. She invites Haman and the king to not one, but 2 feasts. Meanwhile, the king who can't sleep has the records read to him and learns that nothing was done to reward Mordecai for saving his life. He asks Haman what should be done for a loyal servant. Thinking the king is referring to himself, Haman suggests a great parade, so the king gives Mordecai a parade. This only makes Haman even more furious. But things are only going to get worse for Haman. At the second feast, Esther tells the king about Haman's evil plans on her people. And when Haman grabs Esther to plead for mercy, the king has him seized. Ironically, he is hung on the very gallows he prepared for Mordecai. But what of the decree to kill the Jews? Although it could not be changed, the king writes a new decree allowing the Jews to defend themselves. And they do, laying a trap for their enemies and defeating them. The day of mourning becomes a day of rejoicing, which is still celebrated to this day. So why doesn't Esther mention God? There may be more than one version. One, the Hebrew version, which is in our Bibles today. The Hebrew name for God, YHWH, may have been omitted because it would have been considered too sacred to write down. It was common practice at that time just to leave it blank. 2, Mordecai's version. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far. Esther 9:20. Maybe this is the Hebrew version today. 3, Esther's version. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. Esther 9:32. 4, the Septuagint originates from an older version of the Bible which was translated into Greek around 200 BC. It contains additional information, including Haman's letter, Mordecai's prophetic dream, and his prayer in which he calls on God by name. So, which is the right version? Maybe all of them. Just like in the Gospels, we have more than one witness to the story of Esther. From a historical point of view, this is strong evidence that the events really happened. So, who was King Ahasuerus? Oddly enough, he's not mentioned in the Persian historical records. The Septuagint calls him Artaxerxes. But is this the right king? Esther 1:1, Septuagint. In the 2nd year of the reign of Artaxerxes the Great King. However, the book of Ezra clearly lists Ahasuerus and Artaxerxes as two different kings. Ezra 4:6, and in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, and 7, and in the days of Artaxerxes, wrote Bishlam, Mithredath, Tabeel, and the rest of their companions unto Artaxerxes, king of Persia. So who else could it be? The king who came before Artaxerxes was named Xerxes, which doesn't sound anything like Ahasuerus. But in Akkadian, the ancient language of the surrounding region, he was actually called Hisiarsa, which is phonetically similar to Ahasuerus. So where was he buried? In the tomb of the Persian kings at Nakshi Rostam, just outside of Persepolis, along with the other Persian kings of the Achaemenid dynasty, Darius I, Xerxes I, Artaxerxes I, and Darius II. But he's not there anymore, because Alexander the Great looted the tombs after he conquered Persia in 334 BC. What about Esther? Was she even a real person? Greek historian Herodotus records that Xerxes' queen was named Amestris, which sounds a lot like Esther. Another Greek historian named Ctesias records that Amestris was given authority by the king to execute and punish the enemies of her family. A similar event is recorded in the Book of Esther in the Bible. The Persepolis treasury tablets discovered in 1933 and 34 date to 479 BC. And provide further evidence for the characters in Esther, including Mordecai. In the 32nd year, Hippiruka wrote the receipt from Mordecai he received. Woodworkers and relief makers Mardukanisar Mordecai sent. Two of the king's wise men mentioned in Esther 1:14, Tarshish and Meres, were also discovered in connection with Mordecai's name. Tarshish says silver to workmen earning wages at Parsa, whom Maris, is responsible. Laborers at the columned hall, 3rd year of Xerxes, receipt from Mordecai. So what about Esther? Was she buried with her husband in Persepolis? No. Some claim that Esther was buried in ancient Susa, or even Baram, not far from the Sea of Galilee in northern Israel. But most Jews in Iran, ancient Persia, believe that her tomb is in Hamadan, Iran. According to a very old tradition that may go back more than 1,000 years, Esther was buried alongside her cousin, adopted father, Mordecai, in a small mausoleum that has grown and shrunk many times over the centuries, but still stands today, and you can visit it. Most locals are convinced that it is the authentic tomb of Esther, but as always, some people don't believe them. However, one of the biggest connections with the story of Esther is tradition. To this day, Jews celebrate the religious holiday of Purim, in which they eat special food and read the story of Esther. For Christians, Esther is a well-loved book of the Bible because it reminds us of the importance of courage and faith in our daily walk with God.
Hi, I'm David. If you like this video, help me get the message out. Share it with somebody. And watch the next one.